there's a lot of art communities in the mountains in Mexico, and I think that I know that there's some very cool places there for sure. Yeah.
I do want to ask you, Professor, because I think this is an important kind of, I would say it's one of the more significant issues in our nation that has made America infinitely worse economically, and that, of course, is NAFTA. I think that was a start. Obviously, there's been a lot, but I have maintained that the worst president of my lifetime is definitely George W. Bush, but Bill Clinton is not that far behind. Like, he's pretty close. When you consider everything that Bush did in terms of foreign policy in particular, there is just no coming back from that. And a lot of that was obviously driven by Dick Cheney. But you look at the domestic policies that were enacted under Bill Clinton. NAFTA was enacted by a supermajority Democratic Congress, and Bill Clinton signed that into law. And what that has done to labor in this country, this would have been Ronald Reagan's wet dream. He could never have envisioned that he would have been able to have done something like this as president. And of course, he couldn't, because the Tip O'Neill Democratic Congress at that time wouldn't allow it. But Congress comes in under Clinton, completely changes the game, and we've been suffering for it ever since. What was it like on the Mexico side? Were there any real economic benefits to NAFTA for Mexico?
Very good question, and there's arguments for both sides, and I studied this in a little depth, and the arguments are inconclusive because Mexico did win on the manufacturing sector for sure, but it never got the technology transfer that, for instance, China gets. So China gets all these high-tech companies, and they get to profit from the technology that is imported. Mexico is kind of very bad at negotiating its stance on technology transfer. Agriculture in Mexico was wiped out. Literally subsidized agriculture from the United States, subsidized corn especially, killed Mexican agriculture. There were 4.9 million families displaced. And now those empty lots were bought by agribusiness in America. And now they can plant 3 times as much corn in Mexico because of the weather. That in Mexico you can plant corn all year round and have 4 crops or 3 crops, whereas in Iowa only 1, right? So it's like all these bonanza that went to the United States. But on manufacturing, for instance, and financial sector, Mexico became very attractive. And I guess this is a merit of the Mexican government to have made it easier to invest and in the stock market, in the financial market, with trade with its foreign debt. Mexico actually is a very attractive coin of investment, even during the recessions. Overall, Mexican middle class and education grew. So did the actual migration of the middle class to the United States, because the expectation when you created NAFTA, with actually George H. Bush created NAFTA. Mm-hmm. And the expectation was Mexico's going to manufacture, we're going to produce cheap, because we don't have to pay the Mexican worker peanuts, right? And our TVs are going to be the cheapest, best made in the world. We're going to say assembled in Mexico, made in the United States, and we're going to sell it all over the world. But the reality is that employment in Mexico created expectations for families that now those peanut paid workers send their kids to college, and now those kids are engineers, are doctors, are technicians, mechanical engineers, robotics, and Mexico produces a lot of engineers, and they are come to the United States with separate and different expectations than their forefathers, So in one generation, NAFTA changed the expectations of the middle classes in Mexico. So I don't know, Pete, if we really gain anything in NAFTA. It's a mixed bag, one thing is that American products got cheaper. Yeah, Yeah, they got cheaper. Everybody hates free trade when it's free trade, but when it's not, then you're going to see your TVs getting more expensive, right? And you're going to hate the non-free trade either, right?
Yeah.
I wasn't happy with the opening of border. Uh, the reality in Mexico also got all the American pollution, right? All these companies that didn't want to comply with the Environmental Protection Agency just move a mile away from El Paso to Juarez. Is a mile away, literally the same polluting plant with arsenic, lead, and all these is a mile away from the border. They're like avoiding these environmental protections, so they dumped the environment in Mexico. They became a dumpster for pollutants. What else? Yeah, I guess I need the drug dealers and the traffic dealers started to use these newly created chains. So once you let Mexican tomatoes arrive en masse, you're gonna hire an inspector and an X-ray machine, and then you have a huge bridge and a huge border agents and number of border agents, and that allows for drug dealers to squeeze in all the in between the tomatoes and the merchandise.
Right.
You fivefold, tenfold multiply the amount of trade that comes. It's impossible to monitor every box that comes into the U.S. Let's call it space to space. So it's just a mixed bag.
I would definitely agree. And of course, it came at our own exploitation, but we do it to everybody else. That's the thing. I have no problem with free trade if we're trading with countries that actually value their workers. And that is something that, as we know,
We don't value our workers.
No, not at all.
So why would any country want to trade with us? Like, if I were any country, I wouldn't sign a deal with us. We've never honored any agreement that we've ever signed. What if we're signing an agreement, you can bet that the people on the other side are being raped and exploited. That's all there is to it. Like, otherwise we wouldn't sign that agreement. And then we'll still violate it anyway. So I don't understand why anybody would sign an agreement with us.
Well, that's also, in retrospect, it's a lot to do with why these problems persist the way that they do, because our system of government is no longer, it never really was, but it really has just morphed into kind of like a dying empire, because we've become so disconnected with regular people that we're, I guess, for a while, just not even acknowledging that there's any representation. It's been proven time and again, and I'm sure you've taught this as a professor of government. The only people who are truly represented in this country are the people who control everything through money and power. Once you get past that, it doesn't matter. There's a reason why the abundance of billionaires is just out of sight, out of mind at this point. It'd be one thing if you had this incredible idea that just ended up in everybody's backyard, kind of like Steve Jobs with the Apple II. Every once in a while, something comes along that's extraordinary and everybody wants it. But today, we've learned so much about just the whole concept of, hedge funds and just the maneuvering of money, which creates nothing. It does nothing. There is no value. It's an empty nest, and we're recognizing that reality today. And so I ask you, Professor, as we conclude, it does seem that your president seems to be a lot more in touch with regular people in a way that many of our presidents, including the one who's about to come back into the White House, doesn't really, despite what his supporters think. And I love a lot of his people, I do. But I think when you get to this level of desperation—
They're very good people. There's some very good people.
But you end up supporting a demigod. We've seen this time and again throughout history. It's not uncommon. So I would ask you, in conclusion, how do you see your country going forward? And do you feel that President Steinbaum has the interests of the Mexican people at heart in a way that clearly our leaders in our country do not?
I do believe she was trained in a public university like I was in the National University, very leftist leaning. And I do believe on on that she's convinced that something's gotta be done for the people, but the reality binds her. A president is not a person with a magic wand. He's surrounded by its systems and circumstances, and one of the circumstances in Mexico is that Mexico is, like the United States, an oligarchy. So Mexico is controlled by a bunch of families that control 90% of the money, and she's trapped. And whatever she wants to do, even though she controls the Senate and the House and the courts now, all of that change is gonna have to be mediated through these power holders, as you mentioned, Elon Musk and all these corporate personas. It's like the corporation of not we the people, but we the corporation of the United States, in order to
Yeah.
Like, it's not the same in Mexico, right? We the people of Mexico, mediated by the corporation. So I think Claudia Sheinbaum is really well-intentioned, but it's gonna be her power to actually affect change is gonna be hard. I mean, it's not just that because a lot of people in Mexico are also very conservative economically. They saw the gains in NAFTA. They don't want to change the system a lot. So even though they're desperate, but whenever they see change, they protest, which is a kind of schizophrenic.
So I'm getting
like,
that. So here's what I'm getting. I'm getting basically that Mexico is now also an oligarchy, and is essentially that the people that are comfortable and privileged, they're not willing to shake the boat because their lives are pretty good. And so why would they mess with that?
Exactly. Mexico has always been an oligarchy. Always.
Okay. Right.
Never
so it
been
just
other
seems
moments.
nicer. Maybe it just seems to me like a nicer version. I also would like to say that in a million years, as a little girl growing up, it never occurred to me that we would see the first female Jewish president and she would be in Mexico. Like, that never occurred to me in a million years. So I think that's just like, it's a little bit, yes, I know there's Jewish Mexicans. Yes, I know that to be true, but it's definitely not what your typical thought would be.
No, most of Mexico is definitely Catholic, but that's
not anymore. Actually, there's 70%. Actually, the U.S. turned out to be more religious than Mexico nowadays.
Oh, that's not surprising.
Years, yeah,
that's not surprising.
Evangelicals, because we have those crazy, because we have those people. Mexico, it's just like normal.
Yeah, no, if you're basing it, I mean, listen, Catholics go to church, but Catholics as a whole are not fanatical the way that they are particularly in the Bible Belt, particularly in East Texas. It is a completely different world where it's like you're going to burn in hell. It's like that type of religious fanaticism. And that's why when you look across the state at somebody like Joel Osteen, I see the very worst of what religion stands for. The very best of what religion stands for right now in this moment, ironically, is Pope Francis. He really has, he is preaching the true message of Christ in a way that very few ever end up doing, because let's be honest, we've learned in this country that religion is a huge, huge business. A lot of money to be made.
The opposite of Mexico, what I'm seeing in Mexico is sort of a nihilism, like they don't believe in anything, in government, in religion. So it's kind of another radicalism there emerging, brewing especially in the younger generations that I see. They are not ideology driven, not for socialism, not for liberal. They just live in the here and now, which is a dangerous thing. There's a little loss of warmth and passion when you don't believe in anything. You need to be convinced. Even so, I have Christian evangelical students. They are magnificent, amazing, great thinkers, but the world is colored. So maybe my world is colored too. Everybody has biases, Too bad when is when Luke cited that the democracy does not represent all the views but one. That's when it gets dangerous.